is Netlabs is partnering with Mitigant in the region. So Dr. Ihsan is here today to talk to us about continuous cloud verification and what that means for your cloud native infrastructure. So for the people on the call who have not heard of Netlabs or don't know who we are, essentially we have, as I just mentioned, we've partnered with Mitigant in the region. And what we actually do at Netlabs, we specialize in the human defense. So what does that mean? Essentially, so just if you just flip to the next slide. Yep, there, thank you. So essentially, technological adoption and innovation is progressing at breakneck speed. And I guess having the fastest car on the track is not going to win you the race. It's not going to cut it if you don't have a great driver to go along with it. So Netlabs wants to ensure that your teams become the strongest line of defense. And we're excited to partner with Mitigant to explore how their proactive solution, combined with human expertise, creates an unbreakable security posture. So how do we do things here at Netlabs? Our approach is to empower organizations with innovative planning solutions that go beyond the basics. So just the next slide, Ihsan, please. So it's not about partnering with the biggest names. It's really about engagement and motivating teams to develop their skills. Our approach includes real-world simulations, gamified learning, and some seriously entertaining awareness training. So whether you're upskilling developers, building a culture of security, or training the blue team, Netlabs has a solution for your organization. So in a nutshell, this regional partnership means that Mitigant will help you to build a fortress, and Netlabs will ensure that you have the army to defend it. And together we hope to elevate cybersecurity in the region. So with that, I'll pass it back on to Ihsan to tell you about how Mitigant can help you with that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Zafar, for the introductions. And yeah. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Muhammad Ihsan Sukmana. I'm the Chief Product Officer and also co-founder at Mitigant. And today I will be talking about continuous security verification for cloud native infrastructures. Yeah, then let's get started, basically, right? I think as we all know, basically, like the cloud has become the de facto for digital transformations, basically, where a lot of companies now are migrating their cloud infrastructure, from on-premise basically into the public clouds, basically. So as you can see in here, for example, I give an example of Germany, for example, where a lot of companies are now steadily moving to the clouds, basically. And this is like, as you can see, like 46% of the companies here in Germany are already using clouds. Many of them are still planning or maybe still in discussion as well of using the clouds. And there are still many main reasons why a lot of German companies are actually migrating to the cloud. The first one is also the digitalization push, which is 44%. So this is merely as well also contributed because of the COVID-19 basically pandemic that actually pushed a lot of companies as well to become more digital basically, and also like to have a lot of process as well to be digitalized basically. And that's the reasons why that like many of them actually moving to the clouds. Another one as well is called saving costs, basically, because like with the on-premise infrastructure, you are actually responsible for managing everything in your on-premise, and with the moving to the clouds, it actually can save you a lot of money basically for that. And obviously as well that you can also modernize your application from just like one single services, then you can make it as a microservices basically. Then you can easily scale it as well depending on your requirements. And obviously as well there's a need as well with the improved security as well that are offered, lots of them by the cloud provider itself, right? But I think you've probably heard it every single day as well that like a lot of cyber attacks are actually happening as well on the cloud infrastructures, with the number of the cyber attacks over the years, especially on the cloud infrastructure, are increasing over the years, basically, right? And as you can see in here, like we've heard so many things about like the data breaches, about the ransomware attacks, or even also now as well with the big adoption as well of the Gen AI, for example, there's also a lot of like attacks as well focusing on the Gen AI itself, right? And the question is that is your cloud actually going to be ready against cyber attacks? Because the cyber attack can happen anytime and anywhere, right? And you as the customer would like to know if whether your cloud is actually going to be able to withstand this potential cloud threats that are going to be always evolving and always increasing as well over the years, right? And that's always going to be the biggest challenge basically for you as a cloud customers to do so. And the thing is that when it comes to managing cloud infrastructure, who's actually responsible for that? It is actually you as the customer to do so, right? So as you can see on the left graphics there, basically there's this thing called share responsibility model, where basically when it comes to the cloud computing, basically the responsibility of what's happening on the cloud, the cloud infrastructure is divided by two, by the cloud provider itself. For example, in here is an AWS, for example, right, which is responsible for everything that's happening of the cloud itself. So we are talking about the hardware, the firmware, basically, right? All of the necessary foundation things basically to offer services to the as a cloud services, and you as a customers who are actually having your resources basically in the cloud infrastructure, right? So basically, as a customer, you are responsible for securely configuring your cloud resources, right? So what does it mean? It means that your resources as well have to be configured in a way that only certain authorized entities basically can access it as well, and following the necessary roles and permissions basically for that, right? You're also responsible as well to know what resources are available in your infrastructure, and also what is actually happening to these resources, like who are accessing them, what kind of person actually have access to this kind of resources basically, right? And if also sometimes there might be security issues or maybe incidents happening right on the cloud infrastructure, maybe for example a server is down, or maybe like the database for example is, let's say, is leaked to the public, you as a customer is the one responsible to make sure that these issues or incidents will not happen again, right? And that's basically the challenges basically when it comes to the managing the cloud infrastructure. However, there are obviously challenges when it comes to managing the cloud infrastructure itself, right? The first one is that like there's a lack of knowledge of managing cloud, or especially cloud security as well, because many of them don't even know that you as a customers actually have to manage the cloud infrastructure itself, merely, as well as like to manage it securely in that sense, right? Another one is obviously lack of resources. So for example, if you don't have enough manpower basically, or budgets or skills basically within your team, it will be really hard for you to manage your cloud infrastructure securely even. And obviously, when it comes to the cloud as well, it's a really fast evolving system where it can easily scale, and it's also really elastic as well, right? So depending on like what kind of requirement it is, for example, then your environment basically might be different than other companies' environments, right? And then also depending on, let's say, okay, maybe today you only need like requests for 200 customers, and maybe tomorrow is like 1,000 customers, then in that case you're gonna need more resources in order to accommodate those additional requests as well from the customers, for example, right? But also when it comes to security as well, in the cloud infrastructure as well, there is actually like two parts of it, like I would like to kind of highlight as well within this one, which is the cloud security and cyber resilience. So you might think that these two are kind of like, let's say, separate, which is true, which is separate, but they are two sides of one coin in this case. Like every time there's a cloud security, there's going to be cyber resilience. So when we talk about the cloud security, it's basically focusing on managing the security of the infrastructure, also like trying to prevent the cloud security incidents to ever happen, right? So we are talking about, let's say, how we can securely manage the cloud infrastructure, how can we basically detect and eliminate cloud security vulnerabilities, monitor of activities happening on the cloud, and also if you need to be compliant as well. It's basically part of this, let's say, the task within the cloud security itself, right? On the other hand, there's also another side called cyber resilience. So you probably heard the word of resilience, basically, right? So let's say if a server is going down, and if it's resilient, means that it's actually gonna be up in really small, in just a really short time, basically, right? So basically, the cyber resilience, and when it comes to this one, is basically we try to focus on managing the potential cloud threats that can happen to become the security incidents in the future, for example, right? So in this case, for example, then like we're talking about, let's say, how we can detect and respond to potential cloud attacks that can happen to your clouds, basically, right? How can we test the security of the cloud infrastructure itself in case of the cloud attacks? And also, how can also people help to recover the cloud if they got hit by security attacks or maybe an incidents happening in the infrastructure itself? And obviously, as well, that you would like to improve the strategy to protect your the cloud infrastructure itself, right? So the question is then how can we make cloud to be always secure? Because in the end, the cloud itself is going to be always ever changing, basically, and then it's going to be your job to make sure that's to do so. So that's why that we come up with a term called continuous security verification. Basically, what we try to do is like we continuously verify the security of a system to ensure that it is always going to be secure and resilient from potential cyber attacks. The reason being is that like security is not permanent state, basically. It is only applicable for a system at the particular time. For example, let's say if you are doing an assessment today for your system, right? And you say, okay, everything checks out, basically, right? But maybe tomorrow that there is a new changes happening on your infrastructure or on your system, basically, right? Maybe adding a new database or maybe a new storages or maybe virtual machines, whatsoever, right? Like these new additions or changes happening on your infrastructure might not be secure enough. Then you have to basically double check it again to make sure that, okay, is the new resources or whatever changes happening in the infrastructure actually, is it also already secure or not, right? And then you always going to be always have to verify it as well, continuously, as well, periodically as well, to make sure that it's going to be always continuously secure as well, right? Especially when it comes to the cloud, basically, right? It can easily scale and grow. What is secure today might not be secure tomorrow. So that's always going to be some like a good tip to always remember as well. What is secure today might not be secure tomorrow. And in order to do so, to make sure that it's always going to be secure, we have to continuously verify the security of the cloud infrastructure itself. So an example of like how we can easily, let's say, have it in mind, like how the continuous security verification works. I'm using an example. For example, let's say a security guard patrolling the neighborhood, right? So let's say there are many people who are actually going to the work or maybe going to holidays, basically, right? So basically, a security guard basically is going to be responsible to go around the neighborhood, trying to see, oh, okay, is the door actually locked, basically, right? Does he see, for example, a suspicious person in the area doing something suspicious activities, basically, for that? Like maybe he also will check as well, is all the windows or doors actually closed and locked, basically, or maybe was there like a sign of someone, like someone trying to enter the house, for example, right? So like trying to pry it open whatsoever and so on. So the idea with this, a security guard, basically, he is trying to also make sure that all the houses that he is patrolling, basically, he wanted to make sure that there is no incidents happening on these houses as well. So similar as well to this continuous security verification as well, like we're always gonna be having to always check, basically have always to verify as well the security, the security itself of the cloud or the system that you are having in as well. So how can we actually do continuous security verifications for cloud infrastructure? So in here, basically, like in a nutshell, we can split it off into 3 steps, basically. The first one is to securely configure the cloud infrastructure. The second one is to monitor the cloud security posture. And the third one is verify cloud security strategy as well. So, and as you can see here in the image itself, the one that I'm sharing right now, it is basically a loop, basically, right? So once that you have done securely configured infrastructure, you are monitoring it as well. And then after that, you verify again. Then you have to check, and then you have to check it again if everything is correctly, securely configured, basically. So it's an endless loop as well. The reason being is that to always make sure that at all times, basically, the state of the cloud is going to be secure and resilient against potential cyber attacks. So, for example, let's start with the first step, basically, the securely configured cloud infrastructures, right? So we have seen so many examples of like the data breaches or data leaks, basically, from like customer confidential data, basically, on the clouds, basically. just because of misconfigured database or storages, basically, right? And for example, according Gartner, for example, that 99% of the cloud attacks actually happen due to the human errors and misconfigured cloud resources by 2025, right? As you can see there on the image itself, like data on 123 million US households are exposed because the S3 bucket is misconfigured. This is from 2017, basically, and this is an old story. But again, it is still happening to what's happening right now as well. Even in the, like 1 year ago, like a couple of months ago, there has been a lot of like data breaches or data leakage as well happening just because of the cloud resources are not correctly configured, right? Because one thing that what a lot of people don't realize as well, or maybe might be like too late to realize as well, the default configuration is not a secure configurations. What do I mean by that? So essentially, basically, the problem is that when you create resources in the cloud infrastructure, for example, let's say I want to create a new database or virtual machines, whatever, it comes with the predetermined settings, basically, and then this settings itself is not secure in a way that like you would like it to be, right? So for example, we are talking previously about like a misconfigured S3 buckets, for example, right? And this is actually due to the when customers are creating this S3 bucket, for example, it is by default somehow that it is actually accessible to the publics, basically, right? And there has been so many cases that like all the data actually are leaked to the public. Basically, it's like after a couple of years later on that AWS actually make it as a default that like when a bucket is created, basically, then it is gonna be privately accessible. So only to those entities within the environment can access it as well with the right permissions and so on. But then it took many years for AWS to take notice, and you know what? Let's, instead of making a default to be public, let's make it default to be private, right? And even then, after this configuration is still happening as well, right? This the new default configuration settings happening. The old bucket that has been created as well is not affected to it. So you still have to basically correctly manage, correctly configure it as well, this old buckets, so the old databases and so on, to really make sure that it's not publicly accessible to the to the public, right? On the other hand as well, there are still a lot of configurations as well that are disabled by default. And then if you need this kind of configurations, basically, right? For example, let's say we're talking about bucket versioning, for example, or let's say logging, monitoring, whatever, it is disabled by default. And then you as a customer, you actually have to be the one configuring it, enabling it as well, to make sure that it is actually correctly and securely configured, right? And another one as well, what we are talking about as well is Terraform, right? So a lot of people have been using Terraforms a lot of times as well, because it's the de facto solution when it comes to the infrastructure as a code, basically, right? To deploy cloud infrastructure, you just have to, let's say, create some like typing some configurations, basically Terraform commands basically in there, and then boom, you created like your whole infrastructure easily with just like a line of codes, basically, right? But what a lot of people don't realize as well is that like 44% of the modules within the Terraform registry and 80% of the most popular modules are actually misconfigured, right? And many of them as well, we're talking about the AWS, for example, 46% of them actually are non-compliant with cloud security best practices, such as the CIS benchmark, or maybe also other regulations best practice on the market as well, right? And when it comes to the Terraform as well, it does not have the native functionality as well to actually check if it's actually misconfigured or if it's actually secure or not. Like you actually, as the user of the Terraform, for example, you actually have to be the one to know if it's actually secure in the first place or not, right? So that's always going to be the challenge basically for it. Another one that we can think of as well is privilege abuse, basically, right? So what do I mean by privilege abuse? Means that, like, let's say that you it's that you assign more permission than what is needed, basically, to, let's say, an entity like a user or whatever, and then this allows them to do like that to do like unauthorized activities, basically, that affecting confidential cloud resources, right? So there are different types of privilege abuse, for example, that you can also like do privilege escalations, or you can also like do like you can also try as well to, let's say, steal the credential of someone who has, let's say, like a admin uh privileges for roles, for example, right? And then that basically allows you, let's say, the key to the kingdom, then you can do whatever you want basically. And this has been a lot of cases where a lot of companies actually like doing like an internal breaches happening basically just because of like maybe an employee actually was angry, they got fired, and then they still have access to their cloud somehow for some reason, and they can do whatever they want, right? Deleting the services or whatever, and up to the point it's not even recovered easily. Then it's always the challenges, and that's why this privilege abuse also is a good example as well of like making sure that you are not that you are configuring the access and permissions resource configurations basically to only those who needs it, right? Then that's the idea. So then for the first step of this continuous security verification of like how to securely configure cloud infrastructure, we can do several many things basically for that. The first one that you can also do, like you can ensure as well the cloud resources are correctly and securely configured following the best practices regulation on the markets. So how do you do that basically? So then you can do maybe like an assessment on audit or audits basically of your infrastructure. You can use maybe like a third-party solutions maybe, or you can also use, let's say, like the native services from the cloud provider, for example, like from AWS or for Azure, for example. They have their own cloud security, cloud native security services, basically, where they can actually then try to see as well if there are any misconfigurations or something that is basically vulnerabilities in their infrastructure as well, right? So the second one as well is that you actually has to implement least privilege principle. Basically what we're trying to say is that like we have to make sure that only authorized entities can access certain cloud resources with certain permissions. For example, let's say if you are let's say HR, if you're working in the HR department, for example, you're only, let's say, allowed to also access only certain information of the employees, but not, let's say, the banking information of, let's say, the company itself, right? So you are really would like to make sure that only certain people can access certain resources following their what is their roles basically. And that's something that's really good as well to implement as well, not only for the cloud infrastructure, for the whole for like a generic system as well in this case, right? And yeah, and as I said as well, that like you can also you also have to be aware as well of the threat landscape of your cloud infrastructure. And this can be done, as I mentioned before, with a routine security assessment and also with the cloud infrastructure graph, because with the cloud infrastructure graph, it actually helps as well to know what is the connections, basically, what is the relationship between a lot of, like, let's say, resources that you have between multiple cloud infrastructure. And you can also also as well analyze as well who has access to certain resources basically. And that's something that like that you can also like do an analysis and audit basically on that, and then you can basically try to improve it as well to make sure that everything is correctly and securely configured. Another one, the next step of the continuous security verification is that to monitor cloud security posture, right? So as I said before as well, talking about this attack, like this privilege abuse, for example, right? The thing is like there is a need as well for you to monitor what is actually happening in the infrastructure itself. For example, 44% of the cyber attacks actually happen because of the misuse of a privileged account by the employee for malicious purposes, right? And in here, for example, an example of that, like I put it in here, for example, like attackers can abuse Google Cloud, basically build one of the services to poison production environments. The only question is that like, how would you be able to know that this attack actually happens, right? And in order to do so, you can only do it by monitoring the cloud infrastructure itself, right? But obviously, for sure, the first challenges when it comes to that is that many cloud providers do not provide like a complete cloud security visibility where you know what is happening in your cloud, basically, right? Or let's say, or even like, let's start as well, very simple as well. How many resources do you have in your cloud infrastructure itself, right? So for example, when it comes to AWS, for example, if you want to know how many, let's say, virtual machines basically you have in your AWS environment, you have to go to, first of all, like go to the AWS, for example, EC2, for example, right? And then you check as well for each region that you have to know, oh, okay, like here, maybe I have like five virtual machine with this kind of configurations basically, and then you have to go change the region as well. Maybe now it's Frankfurt. Maybe later on you check, for example, for the Ireland region, for example, and you keep repeating it until all of the regions that are available within the cloud infrastructures are available there, right? And then later on, once you're done with it, okay, then that's one cloud service done. Then you have to do it again, maybe for a different database services, basically, or maybe like a networking services, whatever. And you have to keep repeating it again for other cloud services, right? And then AWS doesn't provide you like an information where like all of the resources can be easily be seen in just one interface. That is not possible currently right now, and that's gonna giving you limited visibility of actually what is happening within your infrastructure itself, right? Another thing as well that is also will be challenging as well is that monitoring via cloud logs, right? So obviously, like every activity is happening in your cloud infrastructure is usually logged, basically, and then this cloud log basically can be used like for you that can be feed, for example, to a CM system like or monitoring system, that you can basically query them, searching for any suspicious activities basically happening, right? Or just like to maybe to monitor as well the usage or the performance basically for that. But the problem is that monitoring with the cloud log itself might be unreliable, because first of all, it's not enabled. Some of them are not enabled automatically or not by default. Basically, you have to set up the alert basically, and also so that you also have to set up the detection mechanism as well to detect, let's say, suspicious activities happening, right? So it comes already maybe enabled, but then for all of the interesting use cases that you wanted to see, let's say performance or security, whatever, you have to set it up by yourself, right? Another thing as well is that when it comes to this log file, the cloud log itself, it doesn't come right away after I have done something to the cloud infrastructure. It might come between 5 minutes after the event, or maybe it could be a couple of hours after the event, because with the way the cloud provider works, basically, it's kind of like it's pulling all of the activities, all the messages of the log file of the activities on the cloud infrastructure, and it is written basically as a batch, basically to a cloud as a cloud log file, basically, right? So if you are looking for, let's say, like real time or near real time monitoring, basically, it might be really challenging for you to do so as well, right? The third one as well, that like also this is something also very interesting as well, is that it doesn't always record every activities in the cloud infrastructure, but because the thing is like it also might not record suspicious events happening in your infrastructure, or maybe it doesn't even have as well complete and consistent information. So this is something that, like, for me, like I did a research basically about this, focusing on the storage access basically for that. And what I realized as well is that that all the information, let's say the suspicious activities of people unauthorizedly accessing the files on the storages or databases, for example, in this case, is sometimes is not recorded as a cloud log entry, basically, right? And then this is something that it will make you feel like, okay, then everything is fine if there's nothing suspicious happening, right? If there's no 404 whatever, like 400 series response code, then it's fine, right? But then in reality, there might be already an attacks happening and you don't know about it, right? And that's always the case. And let's assume that you have set up everything, all of the monitoring's happening with your cloud logs, basically, which is already great. Then you still have to investigate as well of the alerts that are coming to your site, basically, right? To check if it's actually a legitimate or maybe a false positive or false negative alert as well, right? So that is something that you always as a cloud customer, you are responsible to actually make sure that you investigate all of the alerts coming in as well, because once the alert is coming, then it's gonna be for you to basically to react as well with the potential threats, and you have to make sure everything is all right, right? So therefore, how should we monitor cloud security posture as well for especially for the continuous security verifications? The first one is that, like, we actually have to take inventory of available cloud resources across different regions and services in one interface, right? This is important because, like, this will gives you as well kind of like the visibility of your whole cloud infrastructure, and then this basically then you can do an analysis, or maybe you can do an audit as well of your resources easily with that, right? So another thing as well, that you can also like do regular comparison as well of the latest state of the cloud infrastructure against the secure state of the cloud infrastructure. So for example, let's say I know that, let's say that I only need 5 virtual machines, and then tomorrow maybe somehow there is only 4 virtual machines, means that there is one missing, right? And then the question is that, like, okay, now there's a one missing, then how did it happen, and like what should we do in case of that something happens, right? So because in here, this will actually allow you as well to detect unwanted changes within the cloud infrastructure, and this will help you as well to react faster for potential suspicious activities happening on the cloud infrastructure as well, right? And another thing as well is that, like, you should also automate the monitoring process using the cloud logs, basically, right? From the log collection step, where they basically generate the cloud logs, basically, to analytics as well, where we basically like download all the logs basically by the system. For example, like if you use a CM system, MDR, XDR system, whatsoever, then you can use it to analyze all of the types, all types of logs available, and then to detect basically suspicious activities, which then you can receive an alerts basically based on the suspicious activities as well. And this will allow you as well to react faster to potential threats that are happening in your infrastructure as well. And finally, verify cloud security strategy as part of the continuous security verification. This is really important. And what do I mean by strategy itself is, I mean, it's very straightforward. When it comes to strategy, means like there's a strategy on how to keep the cloud is always to be secure and resilient against potential cyber attacks. What's interesting about it as well, for example, as you can see there, 51% of the Asia Pacific organizations basically have the lowest level of the multi-cloud maturity, right? By maturity means that this maturity as well, including as well the security maturity, meaning that like they do not know what to do with their cloud infrastructure or multi-cloud infrastructure in this regard, right? They just know, okay, you know what, I build all of my services, I put everything on the cloud, and that's it. But when it comes to, okay, how to manage it securely, how to, let's say, manage the costs and so on, basically, right? They do not know how to do it properly as well. And that's something that is really worrying as well, right? Even that there's another statistic as well that I provide as well, like 26% of the companies do not have cybersecurity incident response plan. So cybersecurity incident response plan basically is a kind of like a playbook, or like a plan where it will tell you as well, when, if in case that there is a security incidents happening in the system, basically, then this will basically tell you as well how to detect it, how to react to it, how to prevent it in the future, how to contain it, and how to investigate it, like do forensic analysis based on that. Like 26% of the companies do not have this incident response plan that makes them, let's say, go blind when they are being attacked by hackers, for example, in this regard, right? And to do so, basically, what should we start with? First of all, obviously, then you need to have a team of personals to manage the cloud security as well, right? So obviously, like you need like DevOps engineer, cloud engineer as well, right? But also then as well, when it comes to the security as well, then you might need as well someone who has like a better knowledge, basically, when it comes to cloud security, for example. Then you can go for DevSecOps, basically, right? Which is like um, uh, another focus basically on the DevOps, which is focusing only not only the development and operation, but also the security as well as part of the whole life cycle of the system itself. Another one is obviously cloud security engineer as well, right? Who's not only taking care of like managing the cloud to just work perfectly, but also to securely as well. Another one as well is SOC analyst, basically SOC systems, SOC team, basically, where basically that they are responsible for security operations center, basically, and they are trying to basically to keep the cloud or any other system as well to be always secure and resilient in that sense, right? So another one as well, that once you have the team that basically able to do so, right, and then you can also do like create the playbook necessary for the cloud security incidents response for that as well. Basically, this will really help for you to react, contain, remediate, and investigate when cloud attacks happens, basically, right? The reason being is then, as I mentioned previously as well, is like you do not want to go blind when you are being attacked by the cloud attacks in this regard, right? Because if you go blind, if you don't know what to do when it comes to, let's say, when you are being attacked, basically, then your recovery time might be longer, right? And the effects on your services or on your cloud or your business will be even bigger than before, right? And but for example, it might be something simple, basically that a simple fix that can help to always to already resolve the issues. But then like if you do not know how to fix it, then you can just make things everything worse basically, and then this will allow for different types of attacks that can happen, and then it's gonna be bad for everyone. So that's why that with the playbook for the cloud security incident response, this will actually help you as well to make sure that you know what you need to do as well when it comes to the cloud attacks. When cloud attacks actually happen in your cloud infrastructure, in this case. And finally, as well, then you can also verify the strategy as well with this some examples as well in here that I mentioned as well, penetration testing. So you probably heard it as well a lot of times as well. It's a very common words as well. So basically in here that you try to penetrate the system basically, right, to see if there's any vulnerabilities or maybe like an entry point that can be exploited by the hackers basically, right? So usually this penetration testing that you will attack the cloud from the outer attack surface basically to detect any vulnerable entry points that can be exploited by the hackers, right? So you are trying to access from outside to inside, so to speak, in this regard. So to just very say it very simply as well on that. Another one as well, it's a new term as well, breach and attack simulations, basically. So where basically like you try to simulate the cyber attacks to the cloud, to the system, and in this case like to the cloud basically, right? To determine which attacks might be successful basically. So but basically what it do is like it does a simulation basically, like it takes a snapshot of the system of the cloud basically, and then like it will try to simulate different types of attacks, and then like try to do this simulate attacks, this simulated attacks basically onto this snapshot of the cloud basically, to see how well do they gonna be, let's say like react to this kind of cyber attacks basically that's happening, right? Based on that, then it's attack simulation, and you'll get a report where you can see, okay, turns out from the simulation I'm 60% secure or whatever, I'm vulnerable to this kind of attacks, and that's the case, right? Another one that is actually really new as well, it's called cloud attack emulation basically. So it's different from the breach and attack simulation basically. So in here, instead of like you are doing a simulation, so to just like a snapshot of the cloud infrastructure, you are actually gonna be attacking the cloud infrastructure basically from within the clouds basically, right? So the idea as well is to emulate the cyber attacks, and but you can do it as well in the let's say automated and safely manner as well, so that you can see as well how to see as well if there are any security blind spot within the strategy of your cloud security as well. For example, let's say that you wanted to test out as well if you are going to be ready against ransomware attacks, right? So you might be able to launch the ransomware attacks in a safely manner, in more automated manner as well. So then you can see as well. So you can see as well, okay, it turns out that my team doesn't know how to react to to these ransomware attacks. Like there is no alert that's being, let's say, raised when it comes to suspicious activities that can happen, that can lead to ransomware attacks and so on. All these kind of things as well is actually like a real attack. So the idea was just like for you to see, is my team and my cloud are ready against cyber attacks, right? So this way you can basically obviously do as well, right? They have a different purposes for sure, and the way that they are also executing as well are very different, but obviously they have, let's say, the same purpose in this case, to really make sure that you like to verify how secure your cloud infrastructure is, right? To see if the strategy that you are implementing in the cloud security actually holds up to an actual cyber attacks that can happen anytime, anywhere. So with that in mind, basically, and we actually at Mitigant, we provide an automated continuous security verification platform that can help to make your cloud to be secure, compliant, and also resilient as well. So it's offered like a SaaS solutions where you can onboard your cloud account in just like 15 minutes. And what we do, we actually analyze your cloud security posture basically to see if there are any security vulnerabilities in your infrastructure, that it can come from, let's say, misconfigurations or maybe compliance violation. And we will also tell them as well how you can fix it as well in this regard, right? If you also need as well to monitor your compliances against, let's say, security best practices standards on the market, like ISO 271, SOC 2, for example, or PCI DSS, and so on. You can also use our Mitigant as well to monitor the cloud security compliance in this regard, right? And when it comes to, let's say, the feasibility of the infrastructure itself, you can also monitor it as well within one platform. So like you can know how many resources you have in all of your cloud infrastructure, and if there's any changes happening in your infrastructure easily as well. And as I mentioned as well before about the cloud attack emulation, we are the first in the world that actually can provide this automated and safely cyber attacks emulation for your cloud infrastructure to improve cloud cyber resilience against cyber attacks. And everything, the onboarding itself is just 15 minutes. It's pretty straightforward, and that's what we offer as well for that. And in a nutshell as well, the Mitigant actually offers these 4 features, basically. The one thing that I have mentioned before, the cloud attack emulation, basically, right? We also offer the cloud security posture management and also Kubernetes security posture management as well, where we can also analyze the security posture of the cloud native infrastructure on the cloud, also on Kubernetes as well, to really make sure that there is no security vulnerabilities in those infrastructure itself. And our newest feature that we just launched basically a couple weeks ago is the security for Gen AI. With a lot of companies are actually using Gen AI to improve their services, basically, right? A lot of them as well do not know how they can do it securely and safely as well, to really make sure that the Gen AI itself can be used, to really make sure that it can be used in a more compliant way as well, right? Because otherwise, we have heard as well so many different like if you search in the Google about the Gen AI cyber attacks as well, there has been, for example, like the SAP, for example, or as well different other companies as well, who got their data to be leaked to the public, or even like their training data to be ransomware attacked, basically, right? Or someone can also even steal the learning models as well, which is really proprietary information, that if you can steal the model, then you can basically replicate what the others are doing as well. So this is something that also we really would like to really make sure that when you are using the Gen AI as well, you can use Mitigant to also make sure that it's going to be secure and also safety as well for your cloud Gen AI workloads. Right. Yeah. So obviously, when it comes to the benefit as well, you can also make sure as well that like we can reduce the cloud-based security incidents. You can also make sure as well that you can also you can save money as well, convert as well to monthly security checks from the, let's say, if you are doing a third-party consultations whatsoever. And finally as well, then you can also improve your, let's say, your reaction time as well, to time to detect and time to react to potential cyber attacks on your cloud infrastructure itself. This is something that you can always do with Mitigant. So that will be all from my side. Thank you very much for listening to my talk today. And if you're also interested for a free cloud security assessments, then you can go to mitigant.io/sign up, or you can scan the QR code today, and then you can get your free cloud security assessment to see how secure your cloud is against potential cyber attacks. So thank you so much, and I hand over back to Zafir.
Thank you, Sam. Yep. So as mentioned, you got the QR code there and the link, and I guess feel free to reach out to us. And the recording, Sam, will be available. Is it if someone wants to watch it later?
Yes, exactly. So it will be shared later on after it'll be shared either tomorrow or the day after, but it will be it will be spread across later on once the webinar is finished, basically.
Okay, great. And I guess, yeah, feel free to look us up. You can look us up on LinkedIn, or give us a call if you guys need any help, or you can also speak to the expert, Mr. Ihsan, for any questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.